Hello everyone! I've finally got a new lightsaber build for you guys today. To start things off, I actually was sent two hilts to install for someone, the OWK TPM and the Korbanth ROTS Flex. But for this video, I'll just be focusing on the Anakin lightsaber. So without further ado, let's open it up and take a closer look at what we've got to work with. Looks like all the parts for this project were included, which is always nice. And here's the hilt we'll be bringing to life, Anakin's lightsaber from episode 3. I've done quite a few of these before, but I never get tired of working on them. Some more parts for the install. The clamp card, we'll stick that on later. And more parts, probably the chassis. Now that the unboxing's all done, let's get to installing this thing and bringing it to life. This is going to be an Anakin lightsaber with an Eco Crystal Chamber. An Eco Crystal Chamber is where you have a normal plastic chassis, but add a simple crystal chamber for aesthetics. It's not as fancy as a metal chamber, but much more affordable. Now here are the parts I'll be using for the install. A NeoPixel connector with a lens, 2 micropixels for the plastic crystals, 2 red tactile buttons, a power switch, battery contacts for an 18650 lithium-ion battery, a 28mm bass speaker, and I'll be using the Profi soundboard. I might end up using more stuff during the build process, but I'll let you know when the time comes. Let's get the ball rolling with something I definitely forgot to add in while going over the parts, the brass rod and brass tube. It's important to start your builds by making sure everything fits together, especially with a crystal chamber chassis. Here you can see that the holes for the rod aren't quite large enough, so I'll need to file them down. After some time, I got all 4 holes filed down enough so that the brass rod now fits through them. Next, we see if the rods fit. Which, of course, they don't. Time for way more filing. Trust me, this part took way longer than it looks. Not only did I have to file the holes for the gray section, but also some of the holes for the yellow parts, and also the ones for the main chassis section, but those weren't so bad. But now the chassis has been fully prepped for the rods and tubes. Now it's on to cutting them down to size. This build requires me to have 4 rods and 2 tubes, which I roughly got the measurements for by testing them in the chassis. My process is pretty much the same every time. First, I mark them where they need to be cut, and then I use a Dremel to actually make the cut. After that, the side I just cut almost always needs to be sanded down to make it smooth and flat, and also to get them to the right size. Once that's all done, there's just one final test fit to make sure everything is how it should be. And look at that! The chassis and crystal chamber fit together perfectly. Up next, we work on installing the electronics. What's nice is that the NeoPixel came with the pins pre-soldered, so all I have to do is solder the wires to it. Always be sure to pre-tin the pads. It just makes life way easier. Oh, and the wires too. Just pre-tin everything, really. Now that's all done, I'll just feed the wires through the tube and leave the rest to deal with later. Moving on to setting up the crystal pixel. With this type of pixel, I can't set it up in series with the blade due to the lack of data out pad, so I need to give it its own independent data line. Next is a slight filing to get the pixel to fit the crystal, and then we do it all again for the second crystal. To finish things up, I just add a little E6000 to make sure everything stays put. Now to set up the battery tabs, which of course starts off with more pre-tinning. Then I add the wires, and it's all done already. Not really though, they still need to be glued in. But after that, it's time to work on the speaker. Speakers are nice and straightforward since it doesn't really matter which side is negative or positive. These days I make it a point to add heat shrink too, just to make things look nicer and add some protection. Next we have the buttons. which is also straightforward. The only annoying part is dealing with the small legs to solder on. And here's how it all looks set up in the chassis. The buttons are glued in using Loctite. This battery stand-in is holding the battery tabs in place while the E6000 cures. And I've also got Loctite holding in the speaker. And that about covers it for the main chassis section, except the power switch. But before we get to that, I took a bit of a break and worked on finishing up the crystal chamber section. As you can see, I got the crystals glued in and added a resistor to the crystal pixels data line. Now to finish this part up, I just have to glue the NeoPixel connector in with some more E6000. We're back to finish up the main chassis with the power switch. After soldering the wires to the legs and cutting off the extra one, I put on some heat shrink before gluing the switch into the chassis. We are now on to the final stage of this build before it has been fully brought to life. With the chassis put together and all the wires in one place, there's only one thing left to do. It's time to install the soundboard. Installing the soundboard is a fairly tedious task, just a steady rhythm of cutting and stripping the wires to size before soldering them to their respective pad. And you pretty much just do that until it's all done. I wanted to go straight into testing this thing, but unfortunately I had to file down a part of the chassis to get the battery to fit better. But now, we test.
Hello there.
Well, that all seems good so far. Alright, looks like it works. I think the last thing I need to do now is just glue the crystal chamber to the main chassis, and it should be complete. Let's take a look at the completed chassis. I'm really happy with how this came out. Looks to be a really clean install. How about we put a battery back in now that everything's glued together?
You owe me one, and not for saving your skin for the 10th time.
Now for some finishing touches. Let's put on the clamp card. There we go. Now that looks like a proper Anakin lightsaber. Okay, so it looks like the chassis didn't quite fit. Unfortunately, this is the chassis I was given, so I had to sand it down a ton to make it fit. And also switch out the switches with bigger ones so they actually get pressed now. Oh well, at least I managed to get it to work in the hilt. Finally, it's time to put the chassis in and see this lightsaber come to life. And now, let's put in the blade. Now for the font ignition, blade style, and color showcase.
You don't know what you're facing. You won't go any farther. Whatever happens, you're not alone.
Battery level.
This is the battery level blade style. It shows how much charge is left in the battery. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked the video, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see all the crazy lightsaber builds and other videos I have coming up. Feel free to stick around if you want to see the crystal chamber in different colors. If not, I'll see you in the next video.